The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Alabama Republican Senate candidate and sort of all-around horrible person Roy Moore has been accused of sexual assault by a 14-year-old girl, and the entire race has imploded or been blown wide open. I guess it depends which catchphrase you want to use. And the backstory, of course, is that we've had this very interesting Alabama Senate race between former Judge Roy Moore, who's running for the seat vacated by Donald Trump's Attorney General Jeff Sessions, which is now an empty seat. Special election. Democrat Doug Jones is running against Roy Moore. Pretty good candidate. Moore is absolutely nutty. Some of Moore's greatest hits include saying that the First Amendment protects Christians only. One said that he believed he might ultimately give his life to try to stop gay marriage, which would be a really stupid thing to say and an even dumber thing to do. Can you imagine giving your life to stop gay marriage? And over the weekend, the race was blown open when it leaked that Roy Moore initiated sexual contact with a 14-year-old girl when he was in his 30s. And Lee Korfman says she was 14 when Roy Moore, then 32 years old, drove Korfman to his home in the woods, told her she was really pretty, and kissed her. Just horrible, right? It's already vile. On their next visit, he allegedly took off her shirt and pants, removed his own clothes, touched her over her bra and underpants, and guided her hand to touch him over his underwear. And the story has been corroborated by childhood friends of Korfman's who said she told us the exact same thing at the time. There are 3 other women aged 16 to 18 who also said that Roy Moore was pursuing relationships with them when he was in his 30s, although given the age of consent in Alabama and the fact that they didn't feel forced, those are not key parts of the most disturbing allegations here. And Moore is doing the full Monty denial, each denial with even less credibility. He denied the allegations. He blamed the Washington Post, which initially reported these claims, for basically doing a smear campaign on him. He blamed the Democratic Party for participating in the smear campaign, I guess, claiming that it's all fake news. And there are actually some Republicans defending Roy Moore. There's this guy named Jim Ziegler, who's the Alabama state auditor. He told the Washington Examiner late last week, in arguably one of the most disgusting and bizarre uses of the Bible to defend child sexual assault, Ziegler tried to use Jesus to defend Moore sexually assaulting a 14-year-old girl by saying, take Joseph and Mary. Mary was a teenager and Joseph was an adult carpenter. They became parents of Jesus, which doesn't really make too much sense. I mean, I think the whole point was Jesus's mother never had sex, so there would have been no instance where she was having sex with some guy who was too old because it was a virgin birth, right? It was immaculate conception or whatever the folks call it these days. I can't really say too much else about it, right? I mean, if I need to explain to you why that's nutty, I'm probably not going to change your mind. Then we had Alabama Secretary of State John Merrill, who told Think Progress late last week, quote, I don't know how much validity the claims have to them. We had Mobile County Republican Chairman John Skipper, who said it does not really surprise me. I think that it is a typical Democrat ploy to discredit Judge Moore, a sincere, honest, trustworthy individual. And there are some Republicans sort of carefully saying that if the allegations are true, Moore has to step aside. Republican Mitt Romney just flat out said Roy Moore is unfit for office and should step aside. Interesting, but do Alabamans who would consider voting for Roy Moore really care what Mitt Romney has to say about it? Probably not, although it's interesting nonetheless. And then as far as voters, the reality is that if you thought that this guy might be a good senator, there's a really good chance you're not going to be influenced by child sexual assault charges. And in fact, this morning, CNN was interviewing Alabama voters, and a lot of them just said, hey, we don't believe it, or he has a lifelong credential of being a man of God, and these are just allegations from some 14-year-old kid. And the real hypocrisy to me is Moore's history of declaring himself the moral champion, the arbiter of family values, and many Republicans do see him that way. Moore refused to remove a wooden tablet of the Ten Commandments from behind his bench on the court. He wanted to install a Ten Commandments stone monument on the Alabama Supreme Court building. Ann Coulter declared him Man of the Year, whatever that means, said he's a great defender of conservative values. Conservative Review named Moore Man of the Year for refusing to allow gay marriage in Alabama. Of course, Moore was ultimately suspended for that and resigned. It's a long list. And the fascinating thing about this is that it puts Moore's views against statutory rape laws in a whole new light. There have been cases where Roy Moore previously argued that an adult having sex with someone below the age of consent, right, statutory rape under the law, wasn't rape if the adult didn't threaten or attack the victim, which is not the way statutory rape laws work. There was a case where Moore was the only vote in favor of a daycare worker who raped a 12-year-old, claiming that there was no implied threat of serious physical injury. And what this tells us is not only that Moore himself is a hypocrite and that maybe his positions on statutory rape were self-serving to a degree that we only now are learning, this also tells us that religious conservatism, although it presents itself as being all about undying and respectable ethics or whatever, it has no real underlying ethics. It's all about winning, and it's all about holding back those evil leftists when you see these Alabama Republicans saying, even if it's true, he lived a life of a man of God, and I'm still going to vote for the guy. Very, very strange. And how is this affecting the race? Well, we'll talk about that a little bit later in the program. Now, as if the Roy Moore situation wasn't bad enough, Sean Hannity, Fox News host, weirdly seemed to argue that everything Roy Moore did was consensual, which ignores this little thing, this serious thing that I call statutory rape. And now advertisers are just running away. They are fleeing from Hannity's program, including one advertiser that I think is going to help Pat out quite a bit in terms of a recent scandal that he's been wrapped up in. I'll get more about that in a moment. After the Roy Moore allegations surfaced, the right-wing media machine kicked into high gear, and it's often the case that they do this, to defend the indefensible. And in comes Sean Hannity. He's interviewing Linda McLaughlin. I don't know who that is, but that's who he's interviewing. And it is bad, bad, bad when Sean Hannity says, hey, listen, this was all consensual after all, which ignores, as I said, this thing called statutory rape. Take a listen to this.
How do you possibly know the truth? Except, okay, so the two other girls were older in this case. He was apparently like 32.
Okay.
And he dated, one girl was 18, one girl was 17. They never said he did. There was no sexual, there was kissing involved. And then they're saying this one encounter with a 14.
Consensual.
And consensual, that's true. And there's, I don't know how you find out the truth.
So it's a little ambiguous, right? It kind of seems like Sean Hannity is commenting on the 14-year-old girl having been involved in something that was consensual, although some others are saying, no, he was only saying that the 16 to 18-year-old girls were consensual and they're above the age of consent. And Hannity says, right, oh yeah, it was consensual. So my initial thought was, well, is this another one of these legitimate rape moments, right? Was it really statutory rape? Because whatever Hannity thinks of as consensual is what it was. Was it a semantic thing? I don't know. But as a reminder, the basis of sexual consent laws are that a person who is a minor, by definition, by statute, cannot legally consent, period. As a society, we've determined that no matter what the 14-year-old thinks they want to do, they're not mature enough to really be able to make that call. Now, this exploded, rightly so, and then Sean Hannity ended up having to do not one but two apologies. One was on Twitter, and one was on his show. And after the show one, he went on Twitter and said, as I said on TV tonight, I apologize when I misspoke and was not totally clear earlier today, and then went on to criticize the media. Similar statement on his program about this, but it was too late, right? The advertisers are running away from Hannity after they ran away from Bill O'Reilly's program some time ago during his downfall on Fox News. Genetic testing company 23andMe, which I used for our DNA test segment some time ago, they're bailing from the Hannity show. They tweeted, we've received inquiries regarding advertising on Hannity. We are not running TV advertising on Hannity. We continue to closely evaluate where we advertise. Realtor.com says that they're out. They sent out a bunch of tweets to people saying that they've pulled the ad placements on the Hannity program. They since deleted those tweets. I don't know what was the PR strategy behind that, but one example of the tweets from Realtor.com's Twitter account: "Thanks for bringing this to our attention. We are adjusting our media buy to no longer include this show placement." And then Keurig, the coffee maker company that uses pods, famous on this program because producer Pat uses it and has suffered at the hands of many audience members as a result of his use. They are out tweeting Angelo to Angelo Carusone, who I know, by the way, interestingly enough. "Angelo, thank you for your concern and for bringing this to our attention. We worked with our media partner and Fox News to stop our ad from airing during the Sean Hannity show." The Keurig thing has set people off. I've got the Eggman tweeting to me about it. I've got people saying Pat has been vindicated as a result of this. Do you feel vindicated by Keurig pulling ads from Hannity?
Totally vindicated. I feel like I've weathered the storm and I came out on top. It's a great feeling.
The crazy thing is, Pat was being criticized because Keurig makes bad coffee, not because anyone said it's a bad company. And somehow now the fact that they've pulled the Hannity ads is helping Pat, which you'll take, I'm sure.
I'm going to buy a new one. Put it in the studio, maybe.
Yeah, Pat actually has an order for a dozen Keurigs. They're going to be lined up behind me here on the set. But the Keurig thing has set people off. Somehow, the defense of child sexual predators led to a cancellation of ads by Keurig, which has led to conservatives posting videos of themselves smashing their Keurigs in protest of Keurig's decision. And this is where we are in politics right now. I'm not going to play any of the videos of right-wingers destroying their Keurig makers, because I don't want to give them any attention. You can Google it and find lots of examples of it. All well and good. Ideally, these companies wouldn't have been advertising on Sean Hannity's program in the first place, but progress is progress. And the real question here is, and you know I would get to it, how is the Roy Moore child sexual assault scandal affecting the race, since this is an opportunity to take out a reliable red seat and put a Democrat in, possibly Democrat Doug Jones? Let's go to the latest polling. So we had these revelations about Roy Moore, Republican Senate candidate in Alabama, running for Jeff Sessions' seat, accused of child sexual assault by a then 14-year-old. We talked about Sean Hannity and other Republican defenders. We talked about people like Mitt Romney saying the guy is unfit, he's got to step down. But how is it impacting the race? Well, we have a new Senate poll where Democrat Doug Jones is leading Republican Roy Moore in the state of Alabama in the race for Donald Trump's Attorney General Jeff Sessions' old Senate seat. This is the first poll that shows Doug Jones having a lead. It has Jones up 46-42. This poll was done by JMC Analytics after the reporting of the child sex assault allegations surfaced against Roy Moore. Now, it's 46-42, but it has a 4% margin of error. So statistically, this is still a tie. And my concern is there an element of the Bradley effect, if the Bradley effect is real? Not everybody believes that the Bradley effect is real. The Bradley effect is the idea that you might have people who are afraid or embarrassed to tell pollsters that they're still planning to vote for the alleged child sexual assaulter. And it was named after Tom Bradley, who was the former African-American mayor of Los Angeles. And in 1982, he ran for governor of California. And he was, depending on what you look at, either slightly ahead or doing well in the polls on election day, or exit polls on election day were showing him ahead, and he ultimately lost. And this was attributed by many people to the idea that they weren't really going to vote for a black guy and they wouldn't vote for a black guy, but they wanted to appear to be not racist, something called the social desirability bias, where people are more likely to answer questions the way they believe would see them most favorably viewed by society. However, there are people who say there's no such thing as the Bradley effect. They say, no, what happened was a lot of Republicans voted absentee in California in '82. So the exit polls were heavily skewed towards the in-person voters who were Democrats, so that there was not actually this Bradley effect. Anyway, it's not universally accepted, but that's one question, right? When you see a lot of undecideds, and there's close to 10% undecideds in this poll, you might wonder, well, are people just not willing to say, I'm still going to vote for the child sex assaulter? We'll see. And in fact, there are some other polls, and there was another poll that came out from Decision Desk HQ, which has it at 46-46 with fewer undecideds. There are other polls which still have Roy Moore slightly ahead. What's clear, though, is that Moore's support has gone down. Now, the other thing I do want to mention is that there's an internal here from the JMC Analytics poll, which shows that 37% of evangelical Christians that were surveyed, 37%, say they are more likely to vote for Roy Moore after news broke of his child sexual assault allegations. And that gets me to something that I was hoping wouldn't be true, but it's not hugely shocking, which is that, look, evangelicals voted for Trump when Trump is ostensibly the opposite of what evangelical Christians really should be voting for, and they are still going to mostly vote for Roy Moore as well. There are Alabama Republicans who are going to be in the position, which for them will be very difficult, of having to decide, am I more repulsed by voting for an alleged child sex abuser, or am I more repulsed by voting for a Democrat? And for many Alabama Republicans, as we are already seeing from voter interviews that are being done by CNN and others, a lot of them would rather vote for the alleged child sex abuser than for a Democrat. And fundamentally, Roy Moore is what Republicans are more than we'd like to admit. And I think that we've got to come to terms with that and just get involved in this race to the extent that we can. I've been saying it for months, right? Do it. Phone bank. Donate, knock on doors if you live in Alabama, because taking this seat away from Republicans would be so huge no matter what happens in 2018, right? Strategically, mathematically, we can figure all of that out. But the idea that Trump already regrets hiring Jeff Sessions because he wants somebody who's not recused from the Russia stuff as Attorney General, if on top of that, Donald Trump's decision to hire Jeff Sessions led to a Democrat taking this Alabama seat, that would just be so great. I would absolutely love it. So get involved in this race, donate, phone bank, do whatever you can. Send me your thoughts on Twitter about it. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Justin Sanchez. Justin, thank you. Thanks for supporting our show. We depend on the support of everybody from Justin Sanchez to all of our other members. You can sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. You can also make a pledge of as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/davidpakmanshow. Of course, when we get to 2,500 patrons, we will produce, edit, and release a dozen long-form lectures from my classes at Boston College. That's when we get to 2,500 patrons. We're close to 2,100 right now. Okay, so let's get going with our Jenga pieces. Quick backstory. We have been doing this thing where when people make contributions at patreon.com/davidpakmanshow, for every 2 contributions, I move a Jenga piece. We have currently moved 21 pieces. That corresponds, by doubling that number, 21 becomes a 42% membership discount code if I am unable to move any more pieces. Whatever the final number of pieces I can move before the Jenga tower falls, that number gets doubled and we create a membership discount. So we've got 5 pieces to move today, and I'm going to get right into it. Pat's going to help me out with the names of the people, and I'm worried today it's going to fall, but let's get right into it, Pat. Who are the first 2 names?
Johan Bartling and Rick Norse.
Okay, Johan and Rick. Is there a piece here that I can easily move without it getting too... Here's one I've got from the top. All right, we are now up to 22 pieces. What are the next 2 names?
David Headings and Tegan Litcott.
David and Tegan. All right, let's see if there's a piece here. It is really getting to the bottom now. Wow, that one is... That's not a good one to move. Here's one. Very, very carefully, and you can see how carefully I am doing this, because we are at 22 pieces, and I am just sliding it out, and we are at 23 pieces, a 46% discount. Pat, what are the next 2 names?
We got Richard Davis and Corey Easterday.
Richard and Corey. Let's see if I can find a piece to move. Oh, my. This is getting... Pat is nervous over there. Pat is really, really nervous. Here it is. And that is now 24. Which gets us a 48% discount. What are the next 2 names?
Imelda West and Christina Hasselbad.
Imelda and Christina. Imelda and Christina. What could I do? What about this one? Oh, wow. And that one goes on top, and that is now 25 pieces, a 50% discount if I'm unable to go further. Pat, what are the next two names?
Last ones. Daryl Takar and Michael Leone.
Daryl and Michael. Will Daryl and Michael be the end of this? Wow. I don't know if it's smart to pull one from the bottom, but I've done it. Almost. Oh, and the entire thing just moved. And I am placing it on top, which gets us to 26 moves, a 52% discount if it were to fall. It continues. Are you shocked that it's gone this far?
Yeah, and it could just fall during the course of the show, too.
Yeah, and
it doesn't have to be the Jenga segment.
If it happens during the course of the show, just from my gesticulating, then it will still be the 52% membership discount. All right, so contribute to the Jenga game by going to patreon.com/David Pakman Show and making a contribution. And we'll continue tomorrow and see how long this nonsense can go on. Okay, the Trump administration may be the death of common sense. It may be the death of America as a steward of the environment. It may be the death of critical thinking. It could be the end of many things under the Trump administration. But it's also, in a way, the end of satire and parody. I've already talked about Saturday Night Live. Saturday Night Live's job, and they do it really well, is very tough because the real world has become almost indistinguishable from the most extreme Saturday Night Live parodies that they can come up with under the presidency of Donald Trump. And Trump advisor Kellyanne Conway has now said, seemingly with no trace of irony or satire whatsoever, about the Roy Moore sexual assault allegations, that anyone in elected office who committed sexual assault should resign. And of course, her boss, the president of the United States, committed sexual assault, and he's the president. And she's certainly not calling for his resignation, at least not directly. She kept being asked by ABC's Martha Raddatz, should Roy Moore step aside? And she refused to answer that question, but instead did say that she's been clear that anyone who commits sexual assault should resign. Let's build up to it. Here's a first clip of Kellyanne Conway. No reference to the Bowling Green massacre in this clip, but she did talk about other things.
For more, let's bring in counselor to the president and one of his top advisors, Kellyanne Conway. Her voice among those advising Donald Trump as he decides whether to reject Roy Moore. And good morning, Kellyanne. The Washington Post story is now 3 days old. You've had time to digest it, time to look through it. Do you have any doubt about the veracity of those accusations?
I said very early in this process that the conduct as described should disqualify anyone from serving in public office, and I'll stand by that. The president and others in the Republican Party have made clear that if the allegations are true, this man should step aside. But I've gone farther than that, and I've reflected something the vice president said as well, which is everybody should know that conduct is disqualifying.
Right, so it's all disqualifying conduct, but what about resignations? And here's the big time one. And again, no trace of irony when Kellyanne Conway says anyone should step down.
I want to be very explicit here. I denounce that conduct. And if the allegations are true, he should step aside. And if the allegations are true about a lot of people, they ought to step aside. And some of them are probably holding office right now.
Let me tell you what.
Well, yes, Kellyanne, many of them are holding office right now. One of them is your boss. That's really a statement from Kellyanne that will really grab you by the something and make you look really closely at it. She wants to talk about Bob Menendez, Democrat, and Bill Clinton, Democrat, right? What about Donald Trump? What about the current president who has been accused by endless women of sexual assault? And the bigger question is, why ask Kellyanne Conway anything at this point, right? She has absolutely no internal set of values beyond getting paid to parrot whatever she's told to say. If we're actually going to be serious about getting every sexual assaulter out of office, you kind of have to start at the top with Trump himself. And there's a video. You can check it out for yourself and evaluate the credibility. There's video of a woman using the name Katie J, who claims that Donald Trump tied, beat, and raped her, apparently in that order, although not necessarily. Also threatened her with murder when she was 13 years old. Don't take my word for it, right? Check out the video, which I've watched a couple of times. She seems relatively credible, and if you want to write her off, as many of the Trump supporters are doing, there's more than a dozen other women, right? So if you really stand by that, Kellyanne, how can you ignore the reality that Donald Trump should be at the top of the list? And this is what I'm talking about when I say that satire is being killed by the Trump administration. The Saturday Night Live sketches around these characters, Sarah Huckabee Sanders and Trump himself and Kellyanne Conway, Sean Spicer, the entire thing, they're great, right? They're brilliant from a comedic perspective, but they're in no way giving you the impression that it could never actually be that crazy, because it's actually that crazy. It's gotten as crazy as Saturday Night Live in the actual real Trump White House. And it's a real problem for Saturday Night Live in a sense, although, hey, I'm not criticizing their ability to put together funny sketches by any means. Kellyanne, come on, just say that it applies to Trump as well. Discuss this with us on our Reddit discussion forum at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. We'll take a break and be back right after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Welcoming to the program today, James Howard Kunstler, who's author of The Geography of Nowhere, The Long Emergency, Too Much Magic, and the 4-book World Made by Hand novel series. He also has a twice-weekly blog, and podcasts can be found at kunstler.com. So let's talk. I want to talk about new urbanism with you, but I think maybe just to get our audience sort of into this and your work, what are some of the main concerns you have sort of about how at least the United States is organized geographically in terms of cities, suburbs, rural areas, et cetera? What are some of the top level things that we should be thinking about?
Well, you know, I have my new theory of history, which is that things happen because they seem like a good idea at the time. And suburbanizing America in the mid-20th century seemed like a good idea at the time. And it's become extremely problematical, you know, the way that we are inhabiting the terrain of North America, especially considering the resource problems we face and the problems with capital or, let's say, wealth or, you know, our accumulated savings. And we're facing a situation that is, you know, we're gonna be short of resources, especially energy resources, and interventions of our central banks have really impaired capital formation. So there's going to be a lot less money to deal with the problems we're facing.
Well, some of the sort of factors you talk about impact much more than just sort of the urban, rural, suburban landscape. I'd be interested to hear a little more as we can start digging in now. You know, we saw this move from the city into the creation of suburbs some decades ago. We're now starting to see and have been seeing for 10 or 15 years the resurgence of cities, and that has led to gentrification. It's led to some cities, including where we are, Boston, Massachusetts, New York, another example, San Francisco, becoming incredibly expensive, and we're now learning all of the problems that that brings as it connects to wealth inequality. So specifically, can you talk about what you see today as the sort of on-the-ground issues with the way in which populations are organized between cities, suburbs, and rural areas?
I think the main problem is that the suburbs are a living arrangement with no future. We're simply, you know, not going to have the resources to live that way. But a lot of people don't realize that the way our cities are organized too will prove to be problematical. That in fact they have grown far too big. They are outscaling what will be the resource realities of the future, and they're going to have to contract, and the contraction is going to be pretty disorderly. And you know, I think we're going to see a whole new disposition of how people live in America, and a lot of it will include the resurgence of small towns, small cities, places that have a meaningful relationship with agriculture, because that's going to become a much more important issue as you know, oil and gas-based industrial agriculture gets into trouble.
Well, some of the advocates of this new urbanization would say it's not so much that the cities will have to scale down, but the cities will have to build a direct relationship to agriculture, whether it's rooftop farms or vertical farming within cities, etc. What about that possibility, that it's
That's
not
a
about...
misunderstanding. That's a misunderstanding of how reality works.
Explain that.
Well, you know, there is such a thing as gardening that can take place in the urban setting. But, you know, one of the unfortunate consequences of the suburban fiasco is that it erased our cultural memory of the distinction between what's the town and what's the country. And there are certain activities that are specific to both. And, you know, we're going to have to do the farming and the food production in the place that is not the city. And the cities are going to have to get smaller. So I just disagree with that whole idea.
What about the future of the suburb? That's something I'm interested in as well. I mean, we've talked with other experts about how suburbs are sort of fundamentally designed to depend on vehicles, to depend on driving, to sort of stymie community creation, except sort of in the most forced and concocted ways just by their very layout. What about the possibility, or is there a possibility, of turning suburbs into small towns as independent from the cities that they surround?
Well, I think that there is a wish that we could somehow retrofit them. I don't think the money is going to be there to do that. You know, I think that the suburbs really have three destinies: ruins, salvage, and slums. And, you know, not much beyond that. And it's, you know, it's unfortunate. Life is tragic, and sometimes we have to pay the consequences of making bad choices. And we've made some very bad choices in this country. You know, it's funny because there's a program at MIT now, which is kind of an offshoot of the Harvard Landscape Urbanism program. And the MIT program is putting out a lot of propaganda about the future of the suburb as a nirvana of self-driving cars and computerization. And this is the kind of techno-narcissism that I think is really going to get us into trouble, because, you know, the societies are really emergent and self-organizing, and they have to comply with the mandates of reality. And I think we're going to find ourselves in a pretty bad collision with reality in the years ahead.
Talk a little bit about your work, New Urbanism, and what you might see as sort of the prescription going forward to better organize the ways in which humans are organizing around cities and suburbs and small towns.
Well, the New Urbanism arose in the early 1990s as a reform movement among a group of architects, urban designers, municipal officials, developers. It was a pretty broad group of professionals who recognized, I think rightfully, that the American suburb was a real fiasco, and that if we didn't figure out another way to live on this continent, that we were going to, you know, our civilization was really going to get into trouble. And they dove into the dumpster of history, and they retrieved a lot of information and methodology and principle for traditional urban design. You know, most of this stuff is methods of designing and assembling places for people to live, that is a human habitat, that have been successful for, you know, centuries, if not thousands of years. And many of the basic principles haven't changed. You know, the design and detailing of a street, the understanding that the buildings have to form outdoor public rooms that are comprehensible, that make people feel comfortable. The idea that the places we live have to be have to work with our human neurology. And you know, they set about to you know, prove their point. They built a lot of new town developments around the United States and also in Europe and Asia. But I think their main contribution was the recoding of municipal laws all over America to avert mandating the suburban sprawl outcome, which had been embedded in law and custom and building practice and really all of the relationships that exist in the property development industry.
Well, that really gets at a question I have about this, which is is the solution, you're talking about zoning essentially. Do you see the solution as coming from the top down in that way? I mean, is there something the individual can do?
Well, no, the solution is probably not going to come from the top down, because it's in the nature of emergence that, that just doesn't happen. What has happened is that as many younger people have moved into the planning profession, they've realized that the suburban mandates are insane, and they have joined the new urbanist movement. And in fact, a lot of new urbanist practice has now become normal across the country. But the old habits die hard, and there are a lot of places, especially in the Midwest and the West, where we're still entertaining techno-narcissistic fantasies about the eternal, endless suburb.
So where do you live? I mean, generally speaking, not like your address, but sort of where have you chosen to live, and how does that fit into your views?
Well, I grew up in Manhattan, by the way, in the center of New York City. So I've experienced that. But I'm living in an old factory village in upstate New York, 200 miles from New York City. And, it's a small town that has the bones of the old economy, but a lot of the old economy is gone. But, I think that these are the kinds of places that will have a much bigger role in America's future. Because the place that I live in is a place that still does have a relationship with agriculture, a meaningful one. And it also has, the bones of a small urban place that is scaled to the realities of the future. So I'm very optimistic about what will happen with small town America and small city America. I think we ought to be very concerned about what will happen with the great metroplex cities, because they're really going to hit the wall hard. And, when that happens, it's going to be a very disorderly process.
We've been speaking with James Howard Kunstler. You can check out his twice-weekly blog and podcasts at kunstler.com. And, of course, all issues that, no matter where you live, there's really no way to say, I'm not going to participate in this problem. By definition, you were part of this because you live somewhere. Very important and super interesting. Thanks for talking to me about it.
You're quite welcome. Thank you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Donald Trump seems to believe Vladimir Putin over our own intelligence agencies, although he's now trying to sort of distance himself from that statement while still saying that he believes Vladimir Putin. It's a very weird thing. And this happened during Donald Trump's trip to Asia. We've been covering his trip. He had that bizarre stop in Japan. He had that strange foreign policy speech in South Korea. And then he had a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Vietnam that was sort of unusual, to say the least. And as you know, the position of American intelligence agencies has been for a very long time now that Russia interfered in the 2016 election with the goal of helping Donald Trump defeat Hillary Clinton, right? That's been the consensus opinion of American intel agencies. Putin has previously, and again to Trump in Vietnam just a couple of days ago, said, we didn't meddle. And Trump apparently believes Vladimir Putin. Here's a transcript from Trump's conversation with a reporter about this. The reporter said, did Russia's attempts to meddle in U.S. elections come up in the conversations with Putin, of course? Trump said he didn't meddle. He said he didn't meddle. I asked him again. You can only ask so many times. And the reporter said, today? And Trump said, I just asked him again. He said he absolutely did not meddle in our election. He did not do what they are saying he did. And the reporter said, on election meddling, did you ask him the question? And Trump said, every time he sees me, he says, I didn't do that. And I really believe that when he tells me that, he means it. There are some really specific questions that need asking, right? Like, for example, how do you know, President Trump, whether you should believe a hostile foreign leader over your own intelligence assessments? Or can you tell us other times where you take the word of a foreign leader over our intelligence agencies? Is this the only time, or do you do it other times as well? What do you believe has made our intelligence agencies so untrustworthy, if that's what you believe that they are? And of course, after the fact, when an understandable amount of chaos started, when Trump said, hey, I basically believe Putin, despite what our intelligence agencies have said, Trump tried to distance himself from these comments, which is a known strategy for Trump, right? You say something, if people react negatively, you deny ever having said it. And we have a quote from Donald Trump at a news conference with the Vietnamese president where he said, as to whether I believe it or not, I'm with our agencies, especially as currently constituted, as currently led by fine people. I believe very much in our intelligence agencies. Now, this is such a weasel way of getting out of this. What on earth is that about, you might be saying? What he as constituted currently, Trump is basically going back to his prior claims that the assessments before from our intelligence agencies couldn't be believed because you had what he described as political hacks running our intel. And Trump actually said during this conversation with the reporters a few days ago. So you look at it, I mean, you have former CIA Director John Brennan, you have former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper, and you have former FBI Director Jim Comey. Comey is proven now to be a liar, and he is proven now to be a leaker. So you look at that, and you have President Putin very strongly, vehemently says he had nothing to do with them. So he's basically saying what he says about every American agency, right? The Congressional Budget Office or the Bureau of Labor Statistics, whoever. Under Obama, when they said anything positive about Obama's economy, definitely couldn't be trusted. Under Trump, well, if they say good things about Trump's economy, then they can be trusted. If they say bad things, then it's political hackery. It's the exact same thing. And I know that this isn't proof that Donald Trump is compromised, but this is exactly how a president that is compromised by Russia would be acting, right? To take their word over his own intelligence agencies, but then to say that now that I've taken over the intelligence agencies and my people are there instead of the previous people, they can be trusted. And of course, this goes to a total lack of understanding of how these intelligence agencies work, right? James Clapper, John Brennan, these are people with very long careers that involve working for both Democrats and Republicans. Both of those individuals considered to be trustworthy and respectable and not political hacks by both Republican and Democratic administrations. And the mere idea that Trump is floating here, the politicization of our intelligence agencies, is so problematic. And of course, it's mostly problematic because he seems to, although he's kind of trying to backtrack, believe Vladimir Putin over the best assessments, the consensus assessments of multiple American intelligence agencies that, yes, happened during the transition period between President Barack Obama and President Donald Trump. Scary, scary stuff. The broader question is Donald Trump more generally being played or manipulated or compromised by Russia? Two former intelligence chiefs believe so. Former chiefs of American intelligence agencies, as well as Republican Senator John McCain, believe that Donald Trump is putting the American people and the United States itself in danger. In fact, peril was the word that they used. Former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper and former CIA Director John Brennan responded to Donald Trump recently calling them political hacks, as I told you about earlier on today's program, because they believe their own intelligence effectively. We have a quote from John Brennan, the former CIA Director, who said it demonstrates to Mr. Putin that Donald Trump can be played by foreign leaders who are going to appeal to his ego and try to play upon his insecurities, which is very, very worrisome from a national security standpoint. Former DNI James Clapper, perfectly building on this ego element of what's going on. James Clapper saying, I think he, meaning Trump, seems very susceptible to rolling out the red carpet, honor guards, and all the trappings and pomp and circumstance that come with the office. I think that appeals to him and it plays to his insecurities. Yes, I do think that both the Chinese and the Russians can play him. And Republican Senator John McCain, also bigly disturbed by Trump's recent comments, saying, quote, President Trump today stated that he believed Vladimir Putin is being sincere when he denies Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election and reiterated that he hopes to cooperate with Russia in Syria. There's nothing America first about taking the word of a KGB colonel over that of the American intelligence community. Vladimir Putin does not have America's interest at heart. To believe otherwise is not only naive, but also places our national security at risk. The reaction from the right, ideally, would be, wait, hold on a second. Serious, respected intelligence officials who work to keep us safe for years and years, top officials, are saying this. Maybe we should listen. Nope, they're just political hacks. Wait. A respected Republican senator who is not known for hyperbole, who is not known for extremism in his beliefs, not a guy I agree with on many issues, but not known as a hyperbolic guy, John McCain. He's concerned about what he sees. Maybe we should listen. Now he's off his meds. He's a crazy old man, or even worse things about his brain cancer. The big picture is that Trump respects those who respect him, full stop. Trump panders to those who he sees as pandering to him. Any reasonably intelligent person, and Putin is one for sure, right, knows by now exactly how to manipulate Donald Trump and Trump's ego, his inability to have real friendships, his entire personality complex makes him very manipulable with particular strategies that there is no doubt whatsoever that Vladimir Putin is an expert in. And that's how you get Trump and others falling for this. But why would it be bad to have better relations with other countries? That's all that's going on. That's one of those statements that, in a literal sense, isn't wrong. Like, yeah, it's generally better to have relationships with other countries. But it misses the disturbing reality of why Trump thinks that that's what he's working towards with Vladimir Putin. And the scariest part of all this is that Trump may be the victim in Trump-Russia collusion rather than the perpetrator, which wouldn't make it any less dangerous for American national security. Will we ever find out the truth? I don't know. Hopefully. I know that I'm still sort of naively holding out hope that we'll get the full story at some point from Robert Mueller. We will see. We've got a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a voicemail that came in recently.
Hey, David. Just want to let you know you're a complete idiot. Trump's the best thing that's happened to this country in a long time.
Right.
And all you idiots just want to shut it down. You're stupid. You're stupid.
Yeah. I don't really have to comment on this one, but I would be interested to know what specific policy achievements has Donald Trump passed that the caller thinks is evidence that Donald Trump is doing more good for us than anyone in recent history. I don't remember the exact language that he used. I'd be interested to hear what policies Trump has executed that you really like. On the bonus show today, comedian Louis C.K. admits to sexual misconduct, and a number of media companies are cutting ties with him as well. A new study suggests that women are less likely to receive CPR from bystanders. Very interesting data. And also a woman climbs through a drive-through window at McDonald's and assaults the McDonald's worker over none other than chicken McNuggets. You know, if it was one of those shakes, I could understand jumping through a window and wringing someone's neck at McDonald's, but the chicken nuggets are quite frankly not that good. So that's a weird story that we're going to delve into on today's bonus show. How do you access the bonus show? Well, there's two ways. Number one, you get a membership at davidpakman.com/membership if you want a discount. The coupon code is IVoted17. Second option for membership is contribute at the $5 a month level at patreon.com/davidpakmanshow. Nearly 2,100 of you have now contributed on Patreon. And for every 2 Patreon contributors, I will remove one piece from the Jenga tower. And as you can see, and Pat looks very scared every time I gesture near it because it is on its last leg, we have made 26 moves here from 52 different patrons, meaning that if the tower were to fall before I'm able to make another move, that will trigger a 52% discount code off of membership. 26 pieces means 52% off. If I can move a few more pieces tomorrow or the next day, the discount will be approaching 60%, which is stunning. Pat will pick up a couple 100,000 memberships if we do that. So very, very exciting. Patreon.com/DavidPakman Show, davidpakman.com/membership. I will speak to you briefly, momentarily, on the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.